Okay, can you hear me? Okay.
I can definitely hear you.
Okay, thank you. I checked, about the screen sharing during the break, so we don't waste too much time. In fact, what I'm going to discuss about now, I am going to serve some appetizers. Let's say the main dishes will be served by Athina and Ilias, who are just right after me, because, since we're talking about the same research project, which is the DigiGem project, a project funded by the European Commission in the framework of the Horizon 2020 program. And I will make a general introduction on what, how, and what kind of challenges we have met until now that we are conducting research for the first time, as Athina said before, with the children and young adolescents. So when we talk about what our main research question is, how are everyday practices linked to leisure time transformed through ICT use? So it is something that could be put under the heading of sociology of leisure, but also in interconnection with game studies, media studies, etc. The aims and objectives of our research, the aim is to understand the interplay between leisure and socialization. This is the two main areas, let's say, that we are investigating, as they manifest through ICT use in everyday life. So the main objectives of the research is to examine how everyday practices linked to leisure, time of children and young people are transformed through ICT use, which is an obvious question. And I think everyone here today and tomorrow probably will talk about this. To develop comprehensive tools to understand something that has already been said during the first panel of the symposium, the fusion of digital and material spaces, this dichotomy that comes at front every time. This fusion in everyday interactions of children and young people, to explore potential alternatives to meaningful ICT use that enhance social interactions and social skills acquisition among children and young people, because usually we talk about the negative effect of use of ICT and of games, for example. While it has been also, they serve also as a vector of social skills, not only digital skills acquisition, and also to provide insights based on research findings and assessments for improved intergenerational communication between children, parents, children, educators, teachers, etc. In order to try to bridge, let's say, this kind of intergenerational gap that occurs when we go in the field. So these are the main research questions. Let's say the obvious one is to what extent and in what ways everyday practices linked to leisure are affected and are transformed through ICT use. What kind of negotiations take place within families for the extent and the types of ICT use? How do children and young adolescents socialize using ICT? How do virtual and physical spaces interconnect in the everyday life of children and early adolescents? I'm using, I think Sonia Livingston mentioned it. My little one, he's 6 years old, he asked for his name day. He likes gifts a lot, and what he asked was 2 or 3 Legos with Minecraft. I mean, he wanted to play in the physical, let's say, in his room with Lego, not in the virtual space, but playing Minecraft. He had some, a beekeeper or something else, etc., etc. So it seems that the two spaces are not considered as separate spaces during gameplay, not only virtual gameplay, but also physical gameplay. Another question is what kind of online and offline patterns of leisure can be distinguished and how they are interconnected. To what extent or how social skills are reflected, evaluated, acquired through the use of ICT. How do children and young adolescents organize their online collective experiences? For example, game session. It is a whole, it's a story of collective organization, of sharing time and experiences. What kind of group dynamics are developed within collective online experiences? And what kind of online identities are developed within online experiences? So the question is how to approach all these research questions, since the issue of leisure by itself being so broad and vague also, it is true that it cannot be approached only through traditional qualitative or quantitative research methods. So what we tried to do is to implement a kind of multimodal approach, as we like to say, also in terms of interdisciplinarity. We have people from different backgrounds and with different expertise, let's say, different methodologies, and in order also to understand communication and representations in a broader sense than the linguistic one. In practical terms, what we are doing, in fact, is we're conducting the old traditional interviews, which is still a very effective methodological tool, combining with communication diaries launched through a smartphone application that we have developed within the project. About interviews, Athina will say much more, since she was the fastest one. She has already completed this part of research from her part. We also organized, and we are using a kind of ethnographic kind of methodology through video game participant observation. Ilias will say much more about this, and also we have some quantitative analysis based on secondary analysis of available statistical data available. So the challenges that we have come across, the challenges extended and accepted by us because it was necessary, since we started our fieldwork as I say here, in a really surreal world, in a world that we could not imagine. The first challenge, of course, is COVID-19. Okay, so we could not actually do any kind of fieldwork, either ethnographic in the sense of game observation or interviews, by having access to people, face-to-face interactions, no access to homes. So what we opted for was, of course, to do this observation in the case of game participant observation. It is done through this platform we are using today, Discord, and interviews are conducted mainly through Zoom. And another challenge that has to do with COVID, it has to do with the content of our research, and not the quality, but the focus of our findings is to try to avoid, this is the objective at least, a pandemic-centered focus. This is because we know that this is an extraordinary, a state of exception, if you want to use this kind of philosophical term. We try to avoid it by conducting a kind of biographic, or not focusing on looking, the present time. Although it is quite challenging when we talk about children, and 1 year and a half is a very, very, very long period in a child's life. Another challenge we had to face is, I think, for all of us who are doing research, and not only social research, but maybe even clinical research, is to avoid paternalism. To put it more simply, how to treat children as actors, how to grant agency to children and co-researchers without imposing notions of meaningful ICT use, or dictating forms of well-being, or labeling risky behaviors or vulnerable situations. There we try to face this challenge by using exactly this tool, the smartphone application, where children are asked, in fact, to provide, to produce their data, and data which is gathered and collected, filtered through the children's eyes, with a few thematic guidelines provided by us. Another challenge is how to combine, since we're using different, diverse kinds of tools, and we gather different types of data. How can we combine all these different types in a meaningful way? And also data that are coming from different sociocultural settings. We have 5 countries participating in this research with very, very different background, from the UK, Norway, Austria, Greece, and Romania. So in order to create, beginning from the latter, to create cross-cultural standards for comparisons, we try to build, structured tools and predefined categories and feedback through recurrent piloting in interviews and also in game research. And in order to overlap, to deal with overlapping information or saturation points in different contexts, we also, our colleagues from the National Technical University of Athens, have developed a tool, a digital tool, with this sexy name, KG Notes, Knowledge Graph Notes, that offers, through artificial intelligence, offers analysis and organization of data based on the development of an ontology that has been designed particularly for our project. So some final preliminary questions. It is usually we have preliminary questions until the end of a research. 3 questions that are, I think, are worthy to discuss and have in mind, and they have been, in one way or another, have been mentioned also earlier today. The first one is, what kind of new knowledge can be theoretically relevant and insightful without just adding to the dominant use-centered approaches? What kind of new theory can really come out from this kind of researches? A second question is how to avoid technological determinism and bridge technical and social configurations without overestimating or underestimating one or another. I would add also how to avoid the social or sociological determinism when we come to the examination of this dichotomy, physical or material and virtual or digital. And the third question is how to build upon a reflection that understands digital and not digital, not as different spheres, but as one undivided common space without just transposing to the digital sphere perceptions on processes and relations, for example, how identities are constructed, or perceptions of inequalities. Usually we are transposing, material inequalities to the digital sphere, talking about digital divide, etc., or hierarchizations. These are some thoughts that come also from the fieldwork about which Athina and Ilias can say much more things. Thank you very much. I think I respected the time as well.
Thank you very much, Dimitris. You're right on time.
You can hear me all right? Yeah. Yep. Dimitris, our leader of this work package, has to deal with a lot of what is this? I've never done this before questions. Because it has these elements of combining the interviews, as Dimitris says, there's 20 interviews in each country. And then there is the application, the communication diary that collects that the kids basically are co-researchers with us, and they give us they ask questions, they can share screenshots. That is then stored in a secure server in Oslo. And then you have the third element, which is when they're playing game Minecraft, we play with them and we ask them questions as well. So today, if we can go to the second slide, please, Matt. I think that I don't need to repeat this because Dimitris gave an overview. of this. So everyday practices, digital material spaces, and so on, right? So we are, if you go to the next slide then, in relation to the interviews, so the idea is that we will target kids between 9 and 15 years old, but the emphasis was to, and Christian, who helped me do this, would be nowhere doing anything fast without him. We were supposed to target basically and try and get diverse social cultural background as possible, but also in terms of any other difference as well, and be very inclusive in how we target people, kids to interview. And in that sense, the areas that are interesting, of course, are wide and varied, like socialization, virtual digital, and so on, like Dimitris explained. But if you go to the next slide, what we today are going to focus, after Christian explains the recruitment and sampling process we followed, we're going to focus on very specific areas and give voice to the kids we interviewed in the process. So, Christian, if you would like to take us through recruitment, then I'm gonna give us some of these so we can hear what these kids said to us.
Of course. Thank you, Athina. Like Athina mentioned, I mean, we've given quite some good consideration to the overall recruitment of the children, because, you know, with such a project, it would be so easy to just recruit 20 boys from white middle-class families somewhere living in London. So therefore, you know, we really sort of, you know, use sort of, you know, sort of my network. So my background is very much in media communication, inclusivity and diversity. So, you know, to tap sort of, you know, into a wider approach in terms of, you know, developing a good sample sort of, you know, of participants that reflects life in the UK. So we've did these interviews over a period of 4 months. We used a snowball sampling technique. So, you know, we started with a few people at sort of, you know, ideally quite contrasting social experiences. And then often, you know, we asked them, once we had completed the interviews, to refer other people that were quite, you know, on the opposite of their social spectrum, so to say. So, and it was also, you know, quite a pleasure to work with Athina on this, because, you know, we shared the workload in a sense that, you know, I would do more the recruitment side of things and would join initially for some of the interviews. And then Athina would more take the lead in terms of conducting the interviews. So that also, you know, proved to be quite, you know, productive in terms of, you know, using our skills and synergies in this area. I mean, interviews sort of, you know, range depending sort of, you know, on children's interests between 30 to 60 minutes. So that was also something that we experienced as quite a variety. And like I said, so, you know, we really tried very hard to reflect the broader structure of UK society in terms of gender, geography, class, and ethnic background. So let me say a few words about these sort of, you know, variables in a bit more detail, just to, you know, to show you sort of, you know, how much emphasis we've given to this. So Matt, if you wouldn't mind moving on to the next one, please. So in terms of gender, unfortunately, it's a bit at least small on my screen. We managed almost, you know, to reach parity in terms of girls and boys. Yeah, so it's nearly sort of, you know, 50-50. So I was quite sort of, you know, pleased sort of, you know, with this particular result. So it's not sort of, you know, that we're gearing very strongly, let's say, you know, towards one particular gender. So I think that was sort of, you know, a very good result in terms of sort of, you know, how we worked on the gender issue and really sort of, you know, made a conscious effort to be quite balanced in this area. Also, in terms of the regions, Matt, if you could move on to the next one. Like I said, so, you know, there is, you know, in particular, actually, it's quite interesting when you work on research around inclusivity and diversity. There is a strange thing that very often most of these studies are conducted in London, because it is an area in the UK that tends to be quite diverse. But there is a lot of criticism that has emerged over the last years that a lot of this, you know, so-called inclusivity and diversity research is actually very London-centric. So in that sense, it's actually quite exclusive. So therefore, we also made quite an effort to represent different regions in the UK that have a very sort of, you know, different socio culture setup. So obviously, sort of, you know, we had to include London as, you know, being one of the major urban centers in the UK. But then the second sort of, you know, so-called hotspot here in the UK were the so-called West and East Midlands, you know, with places like Birmingham or Leicester, which are culturally extremely diverse, of, you know, having large groups of immigrants coming from Southeast Asia. But then also, we included Northern Ireland. So we also conducted interviews with people from Belfast and around the region. Again, sort of, in order to have a region that has, as you all know, like a very different history in the UK, also in terms of poverty, conflict, and sort of, socioeconomic conditions. So really, sort of, that we have 3 different regions that represent a very broad socio-cultural variety. That's also reflected then when you look at the ethnicity of our participants. So Matt, if you would move on to the next one. So I see what you can see here is that about 20, can I read this? About 20 or 25% of our participants had a so-called BAME background. So they're coming sort of, either from Southeast Asia, Chinese, Black British background. So, and although sort of, 25, I don't know, it might seem small to you, but actually be slightly over-recruited in this area, because the average in the UK is about at 14%. So again, we really made some very good effort in order to represent, also different ethnic groups within our sample. And then finally, also, in terms of recruitment, I really wanted to avoid that we just, recruit children from other academics. And so, therefore, mainly by, into a very middle class background. So when, I just, provide some examples from the interviews. Matt, if you move on to the next one. So you see sort of, we had parents in there that, came from all sorts of backgrounds. We had, primary school teachers, firefighters, accountants, data analysts. Obviously, we also had the odd academic in there, translators, and so forth, also engineers. So really sort of, a quite variety of different social backgrounds, social standings. I think we also had, one really sort of, high-class person in this sample. I think sort of, someone sort of, playing like in a golf sort of, championship person, Athina, right, if I remember correctly. So really sort of, again, also in terms of class structure in the UK, we really made sure that we cover a very good variety. And I think all of that was really driven by what Dimitri earlier said. We want to look at different forms of socialization in the UK, right? And in order, to capture different forms of socialization, we need obviously, to build a sample that's quite diverse and therefore, reflecting British society to sort of, a certain extent. Okay, so that sort of, is from me, sort of, explaining a bit more on the recruitment, and then Athina sort of, will present some of our initial findings and some sort of, interesting voices that we collected from those children.
Thank you very much. Oh, it says the video is not available for some reason. Dear me. Well, I
can
suppose
see the slide, Athina.
That's very good. So, hopefully we're on the F10 online-offline behavior slide, right? So one of the
we are.
Yeah. So good. So one of the most interesting, fascinating things, and we have to personally thank Dimitris for that. For how he designed this. One of the key questions was, are people different online than they are offline? Right? Do you feel that people are different? And I want to spend a bit of time in giving voice to what these kids were saying. So you have a 10-year-old here, a female 10-year-old, that says because there's a screen in front of them, they're not afraid to say what they feel. But you wouldn't really say that to somebody's face. So that's the 10-year-old, right? And then you move up age-wise, and there's so I'm asking, well, do you think that they can be more aggressive?
Matt, could you move on?
Yeah, if you can move on to the next one, Matt. Sorry. Do you think they can be more aggressive because of the game? So I'm leading the question there because we're having a whole conversation before, and she's saying, well, yes, they can be like that when they play online. They can be quite competitive, and they can get mad when they died or something like that on the game, which we have all. And if you can move to the next slide. Now, this is where things get a bit more interesting, I think. So this 30-year-old boy is saying that it depends on the person, right? So they're going to be the same as a seed or whatever. But here, what he's saying, and I highlighted it, there are some people that are less snarky and are like more annoying whenever they're not around adults, right? So they aren't snarky and annoying and aggressive or competitive, whatever, because when their adults are around, right? So I'm going, okay, fascinating story, okay. But then I'm saying, I'm asking a follow-up, yeah, because it's not to reprimand them and tell them off, etc. And then I ask, do you think that people display different sides of the personality when they're online? And he said, yes, I do think that. And then I asked for the example. For me, this is the interesting story here. And the person is saying, this kid is saying, they might be happy, nice, not really sure, but whenever you know, just when they're on screen, when they're online, sometimes it's the way to vent their anger and their sadness. And I found that quite incredible, that there is this process that this person, when they're on screen, they might be venting that, and the understanding that the 30-year-old child can understand that. If you move on to so I'm trying to give it in a little bit of a crescendo here. The next slide, the 11-year-old boy, and I found this absolutely fascinating. So this person is saying to me, I'm playing, I love being online and playing different roles, because otherwise it would be so boring. We are in a pandemic, right? So he's saying, I tend to be different just to make it more enjoyable. I'm not myself. I can be someone else. So I'm asking, yeah, what do you mean by that? And he's saying, well, I'm quiet and shy. When I'm doing the online thing, I can act like a really smart person or a really loud person. I can be silly. I can hustle. Like basically saying, I can pretend I don't know how to play a game, and I enjoy being this somebody else. I pretend to be somebody who's completely new, right? And I think that this idea of role playing, having a different identity, and I can do what I like with my identity. So you can see in relation to play, and I think this is very interesting, that part of being online and the ability to do that creates play for them, and imagination, creativity, the things that Sonia was talking about playing. Otherwise, it would be so boring. We're in a pandemic. Next slide. Now, another fascinating thing that I saw was that this particular child was saying that when a person is trying to ask life questions, they're told from school they shouldn't talk to strangers online. You know, like it's a reproduction of real life. You don't talk to strangers in the street or whatever. Be aware of strangers, like we were told, and they are told, you know, you have to be very careful when you're online to talk to people and don't give personal information. That's a key thing that they're told, right? So this person here, this kid here, said, well, because it's awkward when there's a stop at play or whatever, and another person is asking me, a stranger, about information, I find these excuses because it would be too rude. So I say my battery has run out, my internet is not working, and I just disappear, you know. So they have found their own way to basically very politely get out of an awkward situation. So then I found that particularly interesting, that they have their own strategies, that they're not told by their school to do that. Obviously, they develop it on their own. Next slide. It's interesting, a 13-year-old girl who is complaining about her mom, right? So how did she get to complain about her mom? Is because we're asking about this online, offline, and she says you can get immersed in something too much and forget about what's going on in the outside world. And she says, my mom spends the day arguing in an online forum. And I'm saying, well, do you think your mother was spending too much time? I'm asking her, and she says, yeah, you know, I've seen my friends do something like that. It draws them away from the conversation. And then she says, I think they prioritize the enjoyment that they get from the social media instead of the enjoyment that they might get socializing physically with people. Now, this is a quote, a direct quote transcribed, basically. It is not me making it sound like that, right? So this is a person that has clearly thought about this, about sort of been basically kidnapped in a way mentally into this online enjoyment that deprives you from being in the online world. And when we asked, because we had pandemic specific questions as well, and if you go to the next slide, Matt, there was interesting things because, of course, in the UK we had 2 lockdowns. So there was a lot of question about them going back to school and how it was after the first time, and if they found it difficult to resume social relationships, relationship at school, and so on. So there's a fascinating kind of set of data there that is very interesting about the pandemic. And the resilience, because most of the kids actually were saying that they didn't have trouble, although we know that there was trouble in a sense. So it is about how they're actually narrating for themselves how easy it was, but actually there are cases where it wasn't easy, and when we know that as well. So this particular one is interesting because it's about possible like life-changing transformational moment. For this person here is saying, I was able to grow as a person, I've been able to think for myself rather than being in school. And he says, we've got people helping you, like he's got people helping him. I feel I've been able to help myself much more than I would have been able to before this lockdown. So it's like also the individual kind of taking skills upon themselves. Many of them actually said how they developed digital skills and went onto platforms. I mean, there were kids that were doing violin lessons on Zoom. I'm just giving examples. They were doing football sessions with their team on one platform. They were in Google Classrooms or Microsoft Teams for the online. So they experience a variety of platforms, which is a very another interesting area. The next one involves, because we did try to have a variety also in terms of children that might have difficulties or and so on. So this is about a girl, 12, who I was asking about whether she finds that the dyslexia sometimes when she's online, does she find that difficult to be online? And what I found interesting about that is that she has surrounded herself online and people that she knows that are also dyslexic, and kind of talking about how it is easier for her to have friends that are also dyslexic, which I found interesting in terms of the usual scholarship about communities that are dedicated to a certain group of a condition and things like that. If you go to the next one, Matt, so after a while of talking to these kids, I started getting curious because I lead the package for this European project on digital citizenship. So I thought, well, maybe I could ask them a bit about their news consumption and citizenship. Like since I was there, I thought, why not? Maybe I'll find out something interesting. And this is a girl that wanted to organize a protest, and then she says, well, yeah, but I didn't do it because I thought no one would come. So you can see like this 12-year-old going like she is able to think about protest, and even if she's feared that no one else, so she's secure about activating that. And that is if you can move to the last one. And I have finished, and I hope I haven't taken long. So this interview is finished in April, and I'm still trying to understand. We're inputting data to templates for Dimitris for the semantic integration and all the analysis and things at the moment. But I jumped at the opportunity really to talk about this with Dimitris because it would be very useful for to have people's thoughts about some of what these young people are saying. I haven't yet gotten my head around it, to be honest, and I would appreciate the feedback and comments in that regard. And I'm now done, and I think Ilias is going to tell us about the video capturing kind of technique of kids playing Minecraft now.
Okay, good evening there. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. So following mostly what Dimitris said, I will talk a little bit about our experience that I have to say from the beginning that is pretty limited on having interviews with kids, informants. And it's limited because it coincided with the first lockdown in Greece. While we were planning this in a completely different way, means having physical contact with our informants, means going to their houses, knowing them physically. But then the COVID-19 came and everything collapsed. So even the communication and meeting arrangements, online meeting arrangements, were difficult. However, we had the opportunity to get a few, something like 3-4 interviews with some kids in the age of between 9 to 12, with specific particularity that it was technically difficult to establish connection with them while they were in their own houses. So there was an arrangement, and they went at the house of one of the participants, and it became a very particular situation because the parents took it as an opportunity to meet us during the period of lockdown. So I think this has to be considered from the beginning, that while we were doing interviews using Discord and recording through OBS, the parents were present at the same space. And to my opinion, that influenced, to a point at least, the whole conversation. So the experience was more or less went like this. There was 15-20 minutes each time to establish connection through Minecraft, through Discord, and also to set up a kind of familiar environment. Because, you know, the kids at the environment that we found them, the online environment that we found them, they were already playing. And here I would like to make the first point that somehow, I don't know if this could be the case in different conditions, but in these conditions that I have the experience, the kids, they were somehow already in what Huizinga called once upon a time the magic cycle. They were playing, and they were not playing only Minecraft, they were playing various video games, and also they were playing Logo, as Dimitris mentioned before. Yes, those that they are playing Minecraft, they used to play Logo as well. And the general impression that I had, it was like, having some kids in a square, and you interrupt by asking questions. So I had to modify these given questions from the sociology methodological research that they were not fitting at all to the environment. And by modifying the questions, what happened was to start a kind of discursive space where, among other things, we were discussing also about their online and offline experience, that the lockdown had a very strong influence in the results, as I think you may understand, would be the normal thing, because it was a new thing and everybody was concerned about, the kids mainly. So I think that one of the main things that came out regarding the content of the conversation and the content of the recordings was the limitations of the Minecraft as a video game, as an online tool for research. Minecraft may be a very good educational tool to educate classes of students, and indeed it is applied, especially in northern countries, but not only. I think it is applied also at South Asia as well. But it is not exactly the tool to lead the research at least on the frame context of this specific research that DigiGen is focusing about. This is one thing for this has to do with the concept of Minecraft as a game per se. It is a corporative product, commercial, has a new liberal orientation. It has competitive elements and all these kind of things that I don't want to go forward. I don't want to analyze Minecraft at this moment. At the same time, limits the behavior of the players to specific tasks. In the beginning of the DigiGen program, when we were applying, we had the idea to propose a collaborative game prototype that could be co-designed with the participants as well from the scratch. This idea was abandoned because finally the decision favorized the use of Minecraft, but it's not completely abandoned. It may come out by the end of this program. The difference between using Minecraft as a research tool, and I am putting the accent here because I say again that Minecraft could be a very good educational tool, but not a research tool. The difference between Minecraft and a prototype, a collaborative sandbox game that could be produced with the participation of the kids, of the participants, the informants from the beginning, could result to completely different environment of research and facilitate also all these issues that came out during this, I repeat again, limited experience that I had with the Greek participants on the ethical issues. I had to overpass a lot of constraints, ethical constraints, that had to do with the presence of not only faces and voices without the specific permission from the parents and of the participant, but also to exclude what Minecraft as a game is about. Means to connect with public servers and playing with other players that in the physical environment they do not know each other, or even in the virtual environment they don't know each other, but they meet each other into these various servers and they interact. So this was completely cut off because it was impossible to ask players that they appear suddenly on a public server to sign the form of agreement. And not only for the player to sign the form of agreement, but to ask also the parents to fill the form of agreement. I think you can understand the surreal dimension of this process by now. Anyway, the idea of interviewing our participants during these circumstances, under the influence, the heavy influence of the constraints that the COVID pandemic put, and especially trying to establish a connection for further collaboration, further interviews in general, something that I think is going to be played by September, when all this adventure will be somehow, hopefully at least, will be somehow solved during the summer. I don't know, I would like much to answer to questions in general, because maybe I forget something, but coming just 1 point more, if I have the time, because it was mentioned in the previous seance before, and even now, regarding this distinction between the physical and the virtual environment, and that it is time to overpass this. Yes, of course, it is time to overpass this, but it's not an issue that is so easy to overpass. I mean, for sure, for kids, for instance, shifting between a physical game, like, let's say, playing Lego, sorry, playing Lego, and then playing Minecraft, or shifting from one video game to another, and then starting another game, a physical game among them, or even interrupt the whole process and restart again. Yes, it is a reality, yes, for the kids of 9, 10, 11 years old, this new generation, this distinction between physical and virtual, material and immaterial, what a term, it is a reality, but it's not a reality expressed. It is an empirical reality, but it's not a reality that can be formed in words, in theories, if you want. So I don't think that for the moment, neither the game studies, neither the media studies, they can have nothing more than a way to define this new situation in a more oppressed way. This is my question, and I would like to finish with this.
Great. First of all, hello everybody. My name is Tobias from the University of Siegen in Germany, and with my colleague Brian from Jönköping University in Sweden, we want to focus a bit more on the aspect how esports, or in general video games, have an impact on the way we are working. And quite fascinating to hear a bit more, or a bit about Minecraft in the earlier talks, because that's a similar thing which I realize when I talk with kids, how crazy they are about Minecraft, and what a lot of stuff they are doing in Minecraft. And yeah, it's quite fascinating to see how the last year evolved, especially for someone with an HR background, because oh boy, that was a year. We all see it, and you see it here in the conference as well. We are in this new world, in this new working world, and if I talk with colleagues, they have no real clue where it will go. And here in the New York Times, quite interesting picture. Yeah, what if working from home goes on forever, and with this relatively terrible working place in the restroom? And that's something we see, and we see more and more studies going on, talking about the idea how much can be done working remotely. So I assume many of you did some lectures online. We are doing this conference online and all. There is technically possibilities there to do it remotely. And here a study from McKinsey showing that there is a potential of doing stuff remotely to a certain degree. And that's part which makes it interesting that we are moving in this new working world. And quite interesting, the first thing I saw when we all went to a lockdown, an article from PC Gamer stating, hey, we gamers are perfectly for this lockdown. We know how to do it. We have experience for a long eternity. And that's the part where we say that gamers and esports players have an understanding how to survive this working from home aspect. I will go into more detail that they are surviving it. They are not flourishing in it. But we see, those simple aspects like don't stay in bed until the last second, wear shoes or risk becoming 100% shoe intolerant. Don't spend the whole day taking selfies with your pet. But some aspects where, stop working. Huge topic is mental health, burnout, stuff we see in esports, stuff we are seeing exponentially growing in companies, seeing that this work-life blending is terrible. And without strict limits, it is extremely difficult to deal with that. And at the end, don't forget to enjoy it. And that was the basis where we say, okay, just look at esports. Esports is something which is digitally, is something where so much is happening. And the fascinating part is, if we look at it historically, it started out digitally. So everything was chaotic in the early ages, around 2000. But again, still, everything was flexible. Interestingly, the development was going more into the direction we need to get out of this digital environment. We need to get into connection with people. So until 2009, more and more gaming houses emerged. And actually, in that idea, you have 5 players and they are living together. And somehow people thought that would be a great idea to have people at the same place working and living. But more and more a professionalization of this working environment. We see mental coaches coming in. We're seeing psychologists coming in. Nutritionists are coming in. And quite fascinating, more and more in the idea, we have work and we have life. And there is a clear separation, especially with the most professional teams. And the most fascinating part is that more and more esports companies have something like a works council, which is, at least in Germany, something totally old school. And now this new hip environment is doing digital, doing works council. Therefore, we see a trend to create this sustainable and stable environment for players. In the digital working world, we all think about agility, flexibility, dynamization, and the whole buzzword bingo about this topic. Until the last year where we had this enforced digitization. And now, finally, companies are realizing, oh my God, my people are burning out. What can I do? I have to think about mental health, which is, on the one hand, quite sad to talk about that my HR colleagues neglected this topic, but now they are finally talking about it. And therefore, we developed some fields, some aspects where there is a struggle in this new working world, and at the same time where esports is helping on that. And I want to go shortly into the details. So there's this huge research on the health topic. where we are thinking about the esports athlete in the core. As I said, thinking about nutritionist, optometrist, psychology, sports medicine, occupational therapy, athletic trainer, exercise. So many of the most professional esports athletes are doing yoga, are doing sports, and they have this balance, this work-life balance in it, and they are talking about that. And that's something where we see that especially that this professionalization is moving more and more beyond the highest level, but more and more on the amateur level. Even our college team has a cooperation with health insurance on working how to do a balance approach. And yeah, motivation. I think probably most of you had the feeling that they are isolated, that they are not seen in the pandemic, and that they don't see their value. Those video games are showing a value, are showing how this is something where we see progress, we see a learning path, we see a development. And that's the part where that is something where we can learn a lot from video games. The whole topic of HR development is something where we can learn so much of it. And connecting both worlds is something where especially the young generation, which grows up with video games, are wired to learn that. So individual development, learning paths, key performance indicators, all of that are in the video games. And therefore, they learn this sense of mastery, a topic that sometimes in the old working world is often neglected, that people need to achieve something. People need to be part of their career, tinker with their environment, and have the way to individualize everything. So that's the part where gamification comes into it. But gamification is something where we understand, okay, esports is a gamified environment. So utilize that because the young generation is already doing that. And those are the parts where we also see so many skills that in the future are necessary will be or are parts of esports player. Critical thinking and analysis, topics like game sense, theory crafting, leadership in a remote digital environment. Extremely difficult. Probably most of you struggled with that. Me, myself, struggled as well. So suddenly we have those top 10 skills from the World Economic Forum that are perfect for an esports player. And they are training that. They know how to use technology. They learn stress tolerance. And all those topics are showing you how to deal with that. And therefore, also the idea of leadership. Even though that quote from Reeves, he's a Harvard business professor at that time, stated, if you want to see what business leadership may look like in 3 to 5 years, look at what's happening in games. And that is actually more true than ever, because most of the leadership that happens in video games and esports are in a digital enhanced environment. So they are actually the truest sign of remote leadership. And there are those topics like bring fun back. Work needs to be fun. And that is the most motivating aspect. Keep raising the bar, where you see people are challenged all the way, and a good leader can do that. The same for living on the edge. We need more and more innovative, critical thinking people to give this cutting edge for a company. So pushing them in the way to trial and error. Something that is often stated, yeah, you can do errors. That's no problem. But in reality, that is a big problem in companies. So it is still something where something needs to happen. And the aspect of motivation beyond money is a natural aspect. And yeah, also the idea of teams, pickup groups. We are moving into the direction of temporary teams. And if you look at video games, esports with matchmaking and all those topics, that is something we need to have in companies as well. So pickup groups are more bottom-up approach, give the power to the employees. And yeah, as said, this young generation is learning that from the early age. Think about Minecraft. Kids are playing with kids from other countries with no problem, just to achieve one certain goal. So therefore, short term, but there is a goal orientation. Cultural diversity. As said in Minecraft, I had a 6-year-old kid that told me she was playing with a Chinese person. I still don't know how she communicated with that Chinese person, but they knew that, yeah, it worked somehow. Therefore, temporary relationships, high dynamics, informal structures, fragile relationships, and all those aspects show where this working world is moving there. And we see it with teams, with other platforms, where all of that is more and more happening. And yeah, culture. Actually, a more and more relevant topic. What is the organizational culture if everybody lives somewhere else? Last time I was at my university was in November. I still don't know if my plans survived and all that. But it is something where we see this manifestation in artifacts like a building of a company are completely removed. And suddenly is a Discord server a cultural artifact? Probably not. So suddenly we see a fragmentation, and we see it in companies that suddenly those silos of certain departments and groups and all. So there is this finance department, there is research and development. There is no longer a communication between each of them. And therefore, re-evaluation of cultural values. What are the cultural values? And again, esports as an example for cultural values that are foundational. Topic like gamer culture. And if you think about companies or teams like Fnatic or G2 Esports, people in esports have a picture of them in their mind for what they are standing. So that's something where quite a lot is happening. And yeah, the major shift in the working world is about commitment. So if I don't go to the company, if I don't have my own bureau there, if I don't interact with people, why should I stay with a certain company if you can work for any other company? So suddenly the monetization is the crucial aspect. And how to deal with that. So we see remote work may increase the war for talent extremely. So suddenly you have the possibility to hire colleagues from Australia, hire colleagues from other fields. But at the same time, every other company can do the same. So the fit between employer and employee becomes increasingly important. And we see it with esports as well. There is this somewhat mercenary market where the teams are constantly switching. But at the same time, you have some players like Forrest, Patrick Lindbergh, who stayed 8 years with one team, which is decades in real life. So something is happening there. So therefore, hiring the right people and fight against isolation will be essential, even though esports players and the young generation are more capable with that. And yeah, we see communication. The way they are communicating is perfect for this new hybrid working culture. and therefore utilize that. So also topic like trust, more and more we see companies thinking, oh my God, now we have this access on all data. Everybody's working online, and it is so easy to utilize the data on Teams and other platforms. But at the same time, people are mistrusting. Something we saw in Germany with the Corona application, where there was this huge struggle to get people using it. Therefore, the data topic becomes increasingly important. But at the same time, you can use this data to give employees to tinker with that. And you see it in esports, how much those are crunching the numbers to self-optimize them. And yeah, therefore, esportification of the working world, it helps to understand this new working world. At the same time, it is something, this is the new generation, and they grew up with that. And for sure, there are challenges, health, work-life separation. It is not working good in all aspects in esports, but understanding that will also help to understand the new employees. And it is crazy how much potential you have with learning and development. And yeah, it can be a tool to cooperate and prepare and train this new young generation. And we see it popping up in a topic like corporate esports, where teams are built for the company, and you suddenly have company teams, and that is rallying the teams together. And yeah, that was a quick go through. At the end, just a short advertisement. We have 2 calls for 2 conferences, one at the HICS Hawaii conference on digitalization of work, where all those topics can also be relevant. And probably more interesting here for this audience, the Esports Research Network conference, which will be online, which has the topic of physical, mental, and social health. So there is something happening, and yeah, hope that you are considering to submit something, and therefore, yeah, thank you for your audience.
Thank you so much, Tobias and Brian, for that interesting paper. Athina, did you want to jump in with anything, or do you want me to kick off some questions for the panel?
Shall we take a different approach and open it? People have had fascinating discussions in the chat that I saw. Maybe they want to bring some of their questions and comments into this. Like I don't know if that would make sense, and open it, open the whole for questions.
Yep, I'm just going through the. They've been going gangbusters in the questions channel.
Oh yeah, so there's a lot going on there. I found just while you were going through it, I don't know if people want to jump in, but I found this idea that Tobias, that you were talking about, the esports kind of with all like assorted teams, mental health, physical, like occupational, this, that, and how professionalized it all is for people that might have to sit down for 10 hours, to do this as athletes, and how it might inform how we work in the post-apocalyptic administration of the workplace. And I wonder, there is this sense of, I don't know how this is done in esports, but one of the factors is about socializing with your coworkers, and I have found it at the beginning. I was like, oh my God, I must have been socializing so much, because I find I have more time, because I'm not having lunches, coffees, networking with people, around the university campus, which is a whole part of what we do. So that was taken out, and at the beginning I was like, oh, that gives me more time. But then later on, like, you don't have the feel, a lot of the serendipity right, in the workplace, of bumping into Christian, for example, say, well, I have this difficulty recruiting people, that couldn't have happened. And you in academia, in particular at the university, a lot rests on serendipity, intellectual exchange around, let's say, the water cooler, or bumping into people having a coffee or whatever. And I wonder, how is this facilitated in a way in esports, if it is facilitated in some ways where people go online? Like, how does that happen? Because that would be really helpful to know, because we're missing a lot of the social element of intellectual exchange. We have to be online and do it like this, but there's no... It cuts off the joy of being around other people, and having a drink after 6 months in the pub, it was just like quite extraordinary. Although the kids I've interviewed said that they didn't find it extraordinary. They went into it, like fish in the water, but maybe it's something that when you're older, you find it more difficult to do. So I wondered about this socialization element and serendipity. Is it facilitated somehow in esports? That
I
can
mean,
help us.
it's something, definitely you never can replace this real life, having a beer in the pub or something like that. That is probably never replaceable, or just walking around together. But you see examples where people are playing together and talking on Discord together and all that. We see it with some companies who did their Christmas party in video games. So work together, play together. That is probably not the exact same thing, because you are distracted by the video game in that way. But you are able to have the social aspect, to have some ideas out of that, and generate ideas, just having this personal connection, which is quite difficult. Especially we see it now more and more with this problem of virtual onboarding. People never stepped a foot into your university, but are working for half a year in your university. So there are aspects where you can simulate it, and there are those 2D worlds where you have your own avatar, and if you're walking to another person, suddenly a video camera pops up, and you can sit down on a pixel couch. But it is not a replacement. So you can get some serendipity out of it, but probably never this crazy idea which you have after the fourth beer or something like that.
Well, there is bars that have esports now. You have the Meltdown series of bars that started in France and are in England. You have Pixel Bar, and I'm here in Jönköping, the city of DreamHack, and we have Kappa Bar, which is a Swedish franchise. And we had a symposium here about esports in 2019, and we had it when DreamHack was on. So I had a bunch of gaming academics go, okay, let's go. Where's my VIP badge? And we had the main meal in Kappa Bar. And, to introduce people to esports, to really show them, you have to bring them to something like DreamHack, or where I met Tobias for the first time founding the Esport Research Network, was in Cologne at a Counter-Strike tournament. And I brought my fiance. She didn't really get it till she was in a stadium with 15,000 people. Tobias brought his PhD supervisor, and he also hadn't got it. Until you're in that in that environment where there's people going bananas. And the other thing is, it's not like watching Arsenal play Liverpool. If someone's team goes out, they're totally up for other teams, and they're supporting and cheering everything, and it's the most positive sport environment you'll find. Ironically, considering we discuss toxicity so much, so the people who don't compete in esports in real life are called LAN dodgers, because that's where it really is. And the bars, the local LAN events where Justice, our student association, do that once a year. Or twice a year. They have Core Hack, where they bring people together. There's a cyber cafe down the road here as well, and you go after school, and there's teams of kids playing and training or being coached sometimes together. So while we're in COVID, the esports has been brilliant. I've played CSGO, whereas I used to be a one-player sort of person. I've learned to play esports as a kind of mechanism to connect with people. But the reality of esports is that it's about I've talked to people, I've interviewed people at DreamHack, and they're like, "This is my friend from Finland, this is my friend from Denmark, I'm from the UK, and once a year we come to Jönköping to play and have fun together." And people, and so it's kind of esports is all about real life in a lot of ways. It's just, if you want to practice your esports, you can still play with your friends in your bedroom at 10 o'clock at night. Whereas if you play a real sport at 10 o'clock at night in your bedroom, your parents would get mad with you, and you'd be tired after a while. So that's the thing. Esports is real people, is community and real life. And that's something that kind of gets missed, especially in the last year. We're seeing the digital aspects be propelled so much. And I'm streaming now. I have 6 streamers. I'm streaming this because couldn't have enough people. So I'm officially a streamer now. So I'm putting on my CV.
Yeah, but that's a crucial part, and that's something we need to realize, that it cannot replace it. So we see this digital thing, everything needs to happen in digital world, but it is a hybrid culture, and it shows in esports more than everywhere that it is a borderless culture. It is an international culture, but people want to get together, and be it this one time at a DreamHack or something like that. And even with the kids, when I talk with them about Minecraft, they actually go to their friend and play Minecraft together and all that. So it is something which often is neglected. It's not an either or, it's not black and white, it's not analog and digital. It's something between. And that is probably a part we need to find a balanced way, especially if we are teaching the young ones, because that's the part, if we are doing it wrong, we all have this mental health problem, and it is extremely tiresome, and probably everybody knows it after a year of lockdown, how terrible it is to be alone, even if you are not alone in that way.
I think one of the things that struck me, Tobias, about yours and Brian's paper was that clearly live streamer, esports athlete, these are career paths that are becoming incredibly sought after by young people. I think I read a survey not too long ago that said that either YouTuber or esports professional were kind of one of the highest ranked occupations of, like, what do you want to be when you grow up, that children and young people were asked. And I think there's a real urgency in this field, particularly when I listen to your paper about HR, what is essentially HR and shifts in the working environment, is that if this is increasingly going to be a career path that young people are aspiring to get into, and I think that this is a discussion that we'll certainly pick up tomorrow with the industry panel, but this is a relatively unregulated kind of field, particularly when we think about it in terms of workplace contracts, when we think about how young people are socialized and prepared for careers in this kind of industry. And like, I think one of the things you mentioned was burnout. That there's a distinction particularly in the creative industries, when you blur what you do for fun and what you do for a living. Young people, being that video games has historically been this leisure activity and this sort of thing that kind of kids have done, there's a big gap, from what I understand, in this discussion about, well, how prepared are young people for a future in this kind of field. I don't mean to be negative, because obviously there is a vast amount of positives involved in esports and live streaming that young people can get involved in terms of their mental health. But when you think about, I can't remember who mentioned it in the first half of the symposium today, but someone brought up the reality that it could have been Yupe actually, that the reality is that not everyone is going to make it. And so when you have these young people who have been quite anxious and have invested all their mental energy into this hypothetical career path for themselves, and then when they get exploited either professionally or emotionally, or they become the victim of some kind of targeted harassment, that they're not prepared for that. We aren't really, schools and parents and teachers aren't necessarily gearing young people up for that, and I guess there's a question mark over, well, where is the line? Is it the esports teams? Is it the platforms? Is it the educators? Is it the parents? Who needs to be kind of taking the lead here in preparing young people and children for this increasingly mediated and digital workplace that you kind of allude to in your paper?
I mean, that's something where we need to be honest. We have the same problem with traditional sports as well. Not everybody is becoming the next Ronaldo in that way. So the chances to become the next Ronaldo is as slim as becoming the next esports star. So that's the part where we always have to look at, okay, how to deal with that. So the part where I'm more on a proactive approach to say, okay, even though you cannot make it, the path towards it is a learning lesson. It's a learning path, and you are learning a lot for this new digital working world. So more the idea, okay, you cannot make it, but you are able to do other stuff. You are able to go in other fields, in other directions. You have the tool set. And that's the part where especially education needs to frame it in that way to say, for example, something which I try to propagate for now nearly decades, play esports in schools, to have an esports team, and even the idea that there is a coach or a teacher who says, okay, it's not okay to say this bad word to another person. That's the first level. But only those competences are something where you say, you may not make it. And I think that is the most realistic way you can approach it. And you cannot make it, but you can do thousands of other things. So with all the tool sets they have, they are brilliantly prepared for this new digital working world. They are this truly digital natives. And so I'm more the idea to frame this narrative a bit more. It is something where you learn stuff. Same training in sports with dedication and all that. And hello there. That we need to change this narrative in that way and say, okay, it is a lesson. There are dark sides as everywhere, but we can teach them. We can show them where the limits are and change this narrative in that way.
I mean, I've been playing CSGO, and one thing I've learned is that teamwork, communication, strategy that we say isn't there in games is so there. It's actually incredible. And after 1,500 hours, I'm still not great. All I have is that I'm willing to communicate in English. The skills that we learn there are way better than a lot of group university assignments. Much better than I learned ever training for football. Rugby is a more tactical sport of positions, and that has elements, but there's more strategy and teamwork in a 45-minute game of Counter-Strike than you would experience in a week of training and a match for a traditional sport, just in that one session. That's what's really struck me learning this, that the kids playing it are learning such valuable skills, and I think my dream of being a professional esport player is now over, but at 40, but I was being an astronaut, which at the original point, kids used to want to be an astronaut, then it was famous, then it was a blogger. And I just looked up the statistics there. And they say that 180 of the current 1.5 million underage players in England will play in the Premier League. And, that's, you take all the other sports. But those people playing football all day aren't learning the other skills of content, digital communication, and are learning those strategic things in a far less intense mode, and they're tired after playing for an hour.
I think Dimitris and Ilias were about to, maybe it was my impression, to say something. Was that the case?
Yeah, I have, because it was mentioned before that when you think about this sport, is that brings people together. Let's say someone meet and compete with another one in the end of the world and so on. Why the Olympic Games do something different since 100 years ago? And to extend this a little bit, do you think that the way that the organizational and the intention and aims of the esports are something different, something that overpasses the frame context and the leadership of, let's say, the symbol of sports globally, the Olympic Games? For the moment, I don't see any difference in this, and I don't see that technology can intervene in this. No way.
I'll give you an example of which is still a mind-blowing example for me in the game EVE Online. There is actually they created something like the United Nations in this video game, and there was this one player. Okay, in the end, it's a sad story, but he was how you call it a diplomat in this video game. And at the same time, he was a diplomat for the United States of America. And he created in the video game a truce between factions, a truce between people who actually fought wars. Like you could compare it in that way. The USA and the Soviet Union. And that's the part where it those new video games enable them to be free in that way and enable them to actually do what they want to achieve. And you see it in especially in MMOs, massive multiplayer online games, that people are managing massive groups. So when I was 21, I played World of Warcraft, and I managed a team of 80 players. And I had to say only 40 players can play. So I suddenly had a problem. If 80 players said we are here, I had to say 40 players no, and 40 players yes. There was a lot of drama. There was a lot of difficulties in it because it's something where you have to do this leadership idea. And there is something where we have this reality element that goes more and more into it. So it moves more to the reality compared to, chess, for example. Chess is complex, no problem, and no denying that. But suddenly you have this whole social element around it, which makes it extremely complicated. And that is the part where I see suddenly you have to deal with this player who is annoyed that he is already benched again, even though he thinks he did do great stuff. It's something you probably experience in the simple leadership role as well.
So you mean that through the electronic competence, a player can gain an experience that she cannot find in the analog world?
No, not at all. That's not my point. The point is that they have an earlier connection to it. They are easier to get into those positions. At what point do you have the chance to work with 80 people? There is, especially for young ones, where people are looking, what is this kid doing? This kid cannot say anything. This kid has no idea. This element is at first removed in video games. You don't know who this person at first is. So suddenly this kid could be your guild leader. And you realize, okay, he or she is doing a great job. Who cares about the age? So there are some barriers that are removed and that are spread farther than in other environments. And that gives them a learning lesson. That learning lesson doesn't need to be great. That learning lesson can be failure as well. So you suddenly have this chance to have trial and error, which is easier to have trial and error in a video game than in real life when you are leading a company or something like that. So you get training opportunities, training lessons that are easier to achieve.
Well, okay. agree with what you are saying. It's much more easier right now. Although I could say you that 40 years ago, even in the analog world, this thing was a reality. I mean, you were going to a football team, let's say in Athens, as a youngster, and you could meet something like 40, 50, even more people, that they were all coming from various backgrounds, mostly proletarian, to put it in a way, back then. And you could manage all and deal with all these people. But yes, okay, in nowadays, the possibilities that a video game provides, it's what you are describing, it's true. But what I'm wondering is if all this experience will be end as being filtering by a dispositif, to put it this way, that simulates the analog and digital at the same time, example of the leading of Olympic Games or Super League or whatever you may call it. Okay, that's my question.
I've got a good example here. 6,000 migrant workers have died in Qatar, building the World Cup for Qatar, that footballing nation with the appropriate climate. I'm being sarcastic, of course. In Brazil, they have all these empty stadiums from the Olympics. And recently, Riot and Blast did a deal for a particular esport with Saudi Arabia, that bastion of human rights and equality. And the esports fans spoke up and said, look, you say you're for equal rights for women, equal rights for any sexuality or gender, and you have to live by those values. So we have a case of the biggest sports organizations in the world saying one thing, trampling all over human rights and lives and regions. And then when esports, with this younger, more innovative, communicative, socially adjusted, sustainability orientated group came across something that they didn't like, they spoke up and the company listened. And that is a very big change, because the difference between 40 years ago, and I remember 40 years ago, I remember 35 years ago in Ireland, where you had the state media and the 3 TV channels, and whatever the priest told you on a Sunday was the truth, right? And there was no way to say to someone, I like Batman or Transformers. Now there's communities around this that share values and can speak up and communicate. That is a very big difference, because this is a new phenomenon in terms of when compared to other sports. So there's values subscribed and shared by these people, and you can be in games and people will tell other people off for being toxic, or so there's a community around these things that allows an advantage over traditional sports that are run by entrenched people of power. I mean, Italy, Berlusconi, he owns AC Milan. It's billionaires owning teams and ascribing values from the top down. Grassroots, according to Tobias's books and papers and everyone I talked to, is bottom-up resource allocation. And that is one of the best things about it. I work very closely with the federations in Sweden and the Female Legends, Esport United, Esport Verbundet, and they're all about empowering the next generation, passing on cultures and values. As Phoenix Blue here is about accessibility to gaming. I've been playing with disabled people, who don't have an outlet. There's so much sort of good stuff around this that other sports aren't able quite to keep up with. And now sports are learning from esports in terms of innovative media offerings, brand offerings, communication, cultures, and all these values. They're learning from esports how to do this. So really a case of something new coming up, and might have a lot of issues like everything. But on the other hand, there's so much more good happening around it. And I'm playing CSGO, and I'm keeping a research diary, and I'm saying there's way less homophobia and abuse here than I expected, according to what popular culture would have told me. There's stereotypes and memes and mental heuristics that inform a lot of beliefs around games, and that's unfortunate. But what I've experienced is some of the best, most wholesome people and things and events in my life, and it's overall it's much more accessible and healthier as a community than a lot of the sports I've played in Ireland, and a lot of sports, and I've been in a lot of sporting cultures. So it's much closer to the values of karate than football.
I just want to divert to Dimitris, who put his hand up ages ago and never got a chance to get in. I'm kind of curious about what he wanted to say.
No, I just wanted, okay, I love sports, but I wanted to take to talk about the shifts in workplace as you have been describing, and also adding to what Matt said before about this non-regulation thing. I think here, for me, what is interesting, in fact, is, and it is something that has risen, and Matt mentioned creative industries from the whole discussion, theoretical and also the practical aspects on precarity. Because this is something that has to do also with something that you did not really mention. You mentioned it about surveillance and control from the part of the employers, and also some blurry issues such as working, leisure, time, space, and everything. Now in Greece, we have a big discussion about this because the government tries to regulate this remote work, etc. And for me, what is interesting, and I don't know if you have some insights on that, the margins of collective, let's say, organization among people. For example, if we take the example of platform work, which is a new form of work, it's been some years now. We have examples of collective organization, although it is mainly considered by workers themselves that they are self-employed, they're bosses of themselves, etc. In Italy, for example, some big towns, we have people working in the same square, so they can exchange information. So in order to see what is going on in the market. To avoid being isolated. The same has happened with many other people, working, having this kind of working arrangements, isolated, remote, etc. I think this is the main, and whether you have any insights, or some, from the way communities are built, are formed, in this esport thing, and whether you can have some possible potential, some virtualities, as it was mentioned. I think Manolis mentioned it as possibilities as far as shifts in workplace and working arrangements are concerned.
Yeah, that's an interesting question because that's something we research at our university as well. How many problems we have with this platform work environment, where which is actually more exploiting the employees or those gig worker than anything else. And that's the part where this is. Although everybody is saying this is a technical issue and technology trumps people in that way, esports shows that in that way it is more about this, what I term as platform culture. So the platform culture in Uber, Deliveroo Hero, and how all those platforms are called are putting the pressure on the workership. And at the same time, we see it, and that makes esports a fascinating field to research because you suddenly have this concept of platform as something that is explaining in that way is not sufficient to explain what is happening on a platform. For example, if you look at the platform Battle.net, where the games of Blizzard, Activision Blizzard are happening, are quite different in terms of, if you look at the esports players, how they are paid and how much they are getting. And Brian talks a lot about CSGO. CSGO is for me a brilliant example of a shift, how the market looks like if the players have the power, if the players are those who are dictating the statutes. And suddenly you have players who say, I don't care, I just want a contract for a year. And I want to get as much money out of it. Because I have no idea what is happening in a year. I don't know if I want to play CSGO in a year or what else. And I say I'm at the moment at a level and I just can dictate how much money I get. It goes that far that in another game called Valorant, which is only, I think, a year old, it was still in the beta stage at that time, and players said, yeah, even though we have no idea if this game is successful, if there is an ecosystem that works, if there is some form of economical sustainability, if you want me to play for you, you have to pay 20,000 euros per month. Keep in mind, for a game that has no tournaments, that has nothing at that time, for example, if you think about football, football just comes out of somewhere, and in next year, March, there will be a league, a super league. And players are saying, okay, now I want a 20,000 euro per month until in that time. And that makes it fascinating that we see this power game. And that is something we see in platform work extremely, that this power game or this power relation is depending on the specific games. And suddenly you have games where players are exploited. That's near. I saw some contracts. I have no idea how they got through in certain countries. That sounded like slavery. And at the same time, on the spectrum, you have players who say, you have to pay me 20,000 euros per month, or I'm gone, or I sit on a bench, or I do nothing. Suddenly you have, with the same technology, with the same platform technology, the whole spectrum in it. And that is something where I realized more and more, there is so much more we don't understand about platform economy, as most of those platforms are just Airbnb, just Uber, just whatever platform. And in esports, you suddenly have the platform and 1,000 other sub-platforms who suddenly work completely different. And even though I don't know exactly where it goes from there, it sparked for me that there is so much more research we need to do to go more into detail what actually a platform means. I mean, this word is thrown away in so many discussions, but nobody actually understands what are the socio-technological impact of a platform.
25,000 euros or 25,000 in cryptocurrency?
20,000 euros. They want it cash.
Okay.
Don't
Really
try though.
cash.
I'm 40 and I started playing. You won't make it. You have to be younger. So just if you got tempted there, 25 you peak in esports. So we're all past it. Matt's pretty good at CS:GO though. I know that.
I'm all right.
Okay.
Well, I mean, platform economics is a whole other thing. That was my previous project. It's like this is it's coming from the past to bite me. But the question about what is a platform, I mean, I heard Loving has been saying, like, why do we call this, like, for a very long time. There's some interesting work of his there on the platform, like what is this platform, and so you're right. What was I going to say? I had this, while you were talking before about the fact that you have like all these people from different cultures, right, all over the world working together and kind of possibly weak tie relationships. This argument about weak ties, you can be part of very many different organizations, but you don't actually commit, right? You don't belong to one in a consistent way. As well. So these two elements, I'm wondering, because Christian has been with us, who is actually intercultural communication expert. There you go. So we've got one to help us on this issue. If you have any thoughts on that, about this intercultural, like cross-cultural kind of bonds, weak ties, and the difficulty of sustaining this kind of collective organizations of sorts, if you have too many weak ties and people don't commit their time as much. I mean, we see that also in protest culture as well. So you have like like flash in the pan mobilizations. There's no sustainability in movements, which is my core area of research. Is not gaming, is this. So I was wondering if you had any thoughts about that, Christian, the intercultural, cross-cultural stuff.
Yes, I mean, it's interesting because we're talking here about a stage in the development of a certain person where actually intercultural differences are not yet part of their identity, right? So I mean, children at that certain age, they don't yet have, when you're 9 years old, you don't really understand something like British identity versus Chinese identity and so forth, right? So this is really something that becomes ingrained in your identity at a much later stage. So therefore, I don't think it's necessarily surprising that children find it relatively easy to collaborate with other children, because this is how they see other children, right? They see them as other children and not necessarily as other Chinese children coming from another identity. So, and therefore, in that sense, you could even say there is no cross-culture to them, because they're not seeing or feeling that they're crossing cultures, right? And therefore, it seems actually relatively easy for them to engage and to have these kinds of collaborations and this kind of co-creativity with others, simply because the perspective is much more on the other child, so to say. So this is something that really emerges really at a later stage, where identities become reinforced as soon as we become aware of these broader cultural implications. I mean, it's not just something you see in the online world. You see this also. There's some really interesting research from tourism management in intercultural communication. You might have also experienced this yourself. You go to a place like Mallorca, where lots and lots of people come together, and the children suddenly, the parents sit each on their individual table, right, and all the children play together on the beach. And that's is kind of a similar phenomenon that you see in the offline world, because national identities and culture identities they're really develop at a later stage, and that one, and then you require intercultural communication, and you require all these skill sets then in order to overcome them.
Yeah, that's something we discover as well in video games as well. On the first hand, certain video games are successful in certain regions. So some cultural values are triggered in a certain country. And at the same time, we see it on the highest professional level as well, where some cultural fit is always emerging out of it. Quite striking is that there is often a tendency either towards individualistic cultures, Scandinavian countries and all that, or more collectivistic countries, the Asian countries, China and that. And you suddenly see, even though that is extremely broad perspective, just using Hofstede's dimensions, but that there are patterns emerging out of that. And although that is done unconsciously, they are not choosing, I need another Belgian in my team, but they are searching for people who fit in their team. And suddenly they follow certain patterns which are in the intercultural management literature for decades known. And suddenly you have a team out of Sweden, Norway, Germany, and some other more fitting country. And you don't have suddenly a Chinese person in there.
Yeah, but I think the reasons for this one is simply because if you grow up in a certain region, right? I think sometimes with the interculture you can overthink this a bit. And I mean, you would if you come from Sweden, then obviously you know more about Sweden, right? Because you grow up in that region. So therefore, if it comes to something like football, it will be much more naturally come to you to pick football players from Sweden. I mean, do you know any football teams from China? Ask yourself, do you know any football teams from Argentina? Right? Even though I mean, we can all name probably some British teams and some from Germany, but this is something to do with
I played Football Manager if anyone played the Football Manager game, they could probably tell you every team in China and every team in Argentina and all the star youth players from 10 years ago to do a Football Manager with the team. So it's just funny because the video game has given people a broader football knowledge than they would have had otherwise back in the day. Look at Tina's going, oh, I played football. You played Football Manager as well.
No, my son can sit down every time there's a World Cup. He's been growing up with the World Cups and tells me everything I need to know. And it's unfortunate because neither me or his dad are interested, in football. So we're sitting there going, oh, really? Tell us more, So, but they do. He also learned a lot from playing FIFA and like this kind of games, which is interesting because even when I think he was about 4 at the time, when he at the World Cup, the one that was in Russia in 2018, I think it was. So he was 4 years old, and he would say to me, "You need to time me because I need to go and play outside football for an hour and then be an hour on playing FIFA." So he has equal kind of time outside and online. So I mean, which really surprised me. I mean, it's not that they already know what to tell you to get what they want in terms of how they share the online and offline time, which is something that we find also very interested in the digital research because we asked them about time online, offline, and this kind of increase because of the pandemic that was everywhere, But not that I trust that they know how many hours they spend because we used to say an hour and it's 5 hours really or whatever. It's the perception they have of time is another very interesting thing with children that I hadn't realized as well, because I had an interview any before September. So since then, I've started to realize things about time and their perception of temporality is different to ours as well, which I hadn't realized except empirically with my son. But generally, I started reading about that. It's very interesting, yeah.
Sorry, Krishna, I interrupted you there. I mean, but the thing about esports is they're streaming it. People do know the esports teams from all over the world, Ninjas in Pajamas or NIP here in Sweden, whereas they might know Malmo FC in the football. There is a much more international flavor to the teams and people's knowledge about teams in their specific esports because they can be consumed all the time. Every event can be consumed, and you can't watch the Swedish Football League. If I was back in Ireland, can't even watch it here in Sweden probably. But that's the whole thing about esports. It's online. It's actually international and much more so than traditional sports where you only had the big teams. That esports is almost you can follow anyone on any sort of sport. So if you like Rocket League, you might know a small team from the north of England who did well in a regional tournament. Whereas if you follow football, you wouldn't know the same thing because of it's domestically based. So in that regard, it's and I wouldn't have that much knowledge of esports teams because I've got a job and I can't be a kid watching everything all the time. But in that sense, I do find it's very, very international, surprisingly so.
Should we probably think about wrapping up now? We're almost at 4 o'clock. I know that this conversation could go on for hours and hours, but I'm aware we've been talking about work-life balance and in some essence a play and work balance as well. I think it might be time to kind of wrap up for the day. I just want to say on behalf of Athina and myself and the eNurture team that we're all really grateful that you were all able to participate today and discuss your research, which is all incredibly fascinating. And I'm hoping that this discussion will kind of port along into tomorrow, particularly when we start interfacing more with the industry leaders as well. And obviously they're going to have very unique perspectives on the role that industry plays in young people, gaming and mental health as well. But yeah, I just wanted to say, thank you all for coming along. It's been a fantastic opportunity to get you all together and to hear your different perspectives. And I look forward to continuing the discussion tomorrow.